So today I feel like after all these, kind of rather mathematical presentations, my presentation might be labeled as something completely different. But I'm focusing more on labyrinths in a certain relatively specified geographical area, meaning the Nordic countries. My presentation is more about labyrinths as kind of cultural, religious objects that were used. So this presentation does not really focus on the mathematical part, but I'm sure that in other parts of the summer school you will also have the opportunity to kind of dwell more on the mathematical aspects of the labyrinth. So this is this kind of cultural, historical, and art historical, fun, relaxing part. And in the presentation, I'm focusing on two different labyrinths. First are the kind of the stone constructions that you see here on the left. And the other part of the presentation focuses on these painted labyrinths in medieval churches in Finland. But I will start with the stone labyrinths. And these were built by using stone, and they all occur mainly in the coastal areas in the Nordic countries. And the time of construction covers about 900 years in the Nordic countries. So they were being built approximately from the 10th to 19th century, although it has been argued that labyrinths were still built before, still being constructed in the 20th century. And some of the labyrinths were apparently built already before the 10th century. So there is a very long history also connected to the labyrinths in the Nordic context. And the majority of these stone constructions were made in the Middle Ages, so that is up to the 16th century. And the stone labyrinths have many names, and they occur in various geographical locations. So in the Nordic area, there are labyrinths in Finland, Sweden, Norway, Russia, and around the Baltic Sea. Also around the Barents Sea area, and so on. So here you can see approximately the map of the area where most of these stone constructions occur. And in Finland, there are about 140 remaining stone labyrinths, around 300 in Sweden, but this exact amount is very difficult to say. Sorry. And a typical feature for the stone labyrinth in the Nordic countries is that they are unicursal in form, constructed using hundreds of stones. And this unicursal means that there is a kind of the labyrinth is constructed so that there is only one path that leads to the center. This unicursal form is also called an angle type or classical labyrinth because it is exactly the same as the classical Cretan labyrinth, although the Nordic stone labyrinths are they are round, whereas the Cretan labyrinth is sort of this square form. Also, these stone constructions have many names. Oh, sorry, slightly ahead. But here is basically the form of the unicursal labyrinth. And in a workshop yesterday, we kind of experimented on drawing the labyrinth, and those of you lucky ones who attend my workshop today will also experiment on drawing the labyrinth. But this is basically how you construct it. So it's quite simple to draw. And it evolves like this by adding, again, also a new circle. So here are a few labyrinths still remaining. I think these are mainly from Finland. Here you can actually see a person walking the labyrinth over there. And these have many names. They are called Jungfrudans, Trojaborg, Troytown, just to mention a few. And in Finland, they are usually called jatulintarha, which basically means an enclosure of jatuli. So here you can see how the word jatulintarha is written. So what is jatuli then? And traditionally, jatuli has been thought to have been this kind of a mysterious tribe that inhabited Lapland. And they were regarded as powerful witches who were kind of thought to be very large in size. And this notion of this size has resulted to this idea that jatuli might have been in fact giants. So this idea that these large, mysterious stone constructions were constructed by giants was something kind of regarded as a logical explanation of how these could have been built. The word jatuli is very similar to the Scandinavian word jotun or jötun. And the jotun are these creatures in Norse mythology, and they also mean giants. So there seems to be kind of a relatively fairly deeply rooted conception that jatuli means giants. Of course, this may be folklore, but jatuli can refer to actual people or an actual tribe. And there are two different suggestions of where the name jatuli may come from and to whom it may refer to. First, the jatuli can be a reminiscence of Vikings or other Scandinavian tribes. So, and if this refers to Vikings, it could refer to Viking raiders who levied taxes on the Sami people in Lapland. But the name jatuli can merely be a general name that doesn't really mean anything special. And this could mean that the name jatulintarha was not the original name for these constructions, but it was given only after the original name had disappeared. So in fact, we call these with a certain name, but was this their original name is obscure. So jatulintarha is Finnish, and the Scandinavian equivalent is Trojaborg, basically meaning Troytown, the English name Troytown. And these constructions are called Troytowns in the British Isles. And again, so what does Trojaborg mean? And one explanation is that the word Troja might derive from the Old Norse word dreje, and thus refer to the kind of many turns in the labyrinthine pattern. But traditionally, if we look at the word Troytown, this presumably refers to popular legend about how the walls of the city of the biblical Troy were constructed in such a confusing and complex way that any enemy who tried to enter the walls and thus the city were unable to find their way out. And the Troytown, as it refers to an actual city, it also has associations with labyrinths to such cities such as Jericho, Jerusalem, Babylon, Nineveh in the Middle Ages. And for example, there's a 14th century map of Jericho in Farhi Bible, where you can see how the city is in the middle of the labyrinth. And this, the seven-walled city of the biblical Jericho was often imagined as a form of a labyrinth. And there is a story that an army who tried to invade Jericho kind of had to walk around the city 7 times, or that is what the narrative says, and this has kind of led to these notions that perhaps the Jericho was in fact in a center of some sort of a labyrinthine wall construction. Oops. And then there's still the word Jungfrudans, which is Swedish, and it means a maiden's or a virgin's dance. So Jungfru is a young girl or a virgin, and a dance is a dance. And this refers to a springtime game of walking or dancing the labyrinth. And here in such a dance, a maiden is placed in the center of the labyrinth, and then it was the young man's task to enter the labyrinth and rescue her. And this, of course, resonates the Theseus myth, where Theseus rescues Ariadne from the labyrinth. So, how were these used and constructed? Well, we don't really know. There's no information to begin with on how these stone labyrinths were actually constructed. There are no objects or other remains that have been found inside the labyrinths in archaeological excavations that could give any clues on what these constructions were actually used for. So thus, all the suggestions that I am making here, and usually what researchers make, are mainly based on tradition, folklore, and myth. But it seems fairly reasonable to suggest that there undoubtedly were many ways to use the labyrinth in historical times, and it is impossible to pinpoint just one or two functions, and probably they didn't work like that in any way. So I would say that the labyrinths were used in various ways in various historical periods. And also the uses and functions of the Nordic labyrinths have changed during the centuries. But first, it has been suggested that these stone labyrinths were used as a part of a navigation system. So what does this mean? John Kraft, a Swedish researcher of religions, has interpreted the coastal labyrinths as part of maritime navigation system in the Middle Ages that was connected to organizing the pilot system in the sea. And according to Kraft, the labyrinths in the coastal areas signaled seafarers where to get maritime pilot services. So this suggestion of the use of the labyrinth is very practical. Also, coastal labyrinths can also be connected to various rituals that have some connection to the sea. For example, such rituals that aim at providing good fortune in fishing and seafaring. Fishermen could have used labyrinths for protection against the perils of the sea, and probably also to increase their catch. Then it has been suggested that the labyrinths operated as property rights, signaling various property rights to a certain area. And the Finnish researcher Petteri Pietiläinen has just suggested that the labyrinths defined property rights in the sense that labyrinths may have been used in defining the limits of a certain area. And since they kind of tend to be in a relatively remote areas in the coastal areas, where it was sometimes very difficult to define the borders of a certain piece of land, and there might have been disputes on who owned what. So a labyrinth might have operated as an observation point where you could see the area under your possession. So if you kind of went to this site where the labyrinth was and you looked at all the land, so it basically belonged to you. Also, labyrinths occur in border of communities, and thus, in that sense, they could define the limits of various communities. And John Kraft has also suggested that, especially in pagan Sweden, labyrinths could have also reflected a system of old communities where each tribe had a labyrinth, and most of the inhabitants lived within one day walking distance from it. Then labyrinths are often connected to various magical uses. And apparently, Lapps and shepherds could have used labyrinths for protecting their reindeer from wolves and wolverines. Labyrinths have also apparently been used as protection or as a remedy for mental illnesses, but I mean, this sounds rather strange, so I don't really know how they were actually used and were they really used in such purposes, but this is one suggestion. And some labyrinths might have been used in order to scare scare away evil forces, and to give protection against the evil, whatever it was. I talked briefly about a ritualistic use that kind of aimed at providing good fortune, but then there were other sort of rituals that the magic labyrinths were used. And this is one of them. And this is kind of the labyrinths were used in order to kind of, or in a dance. So here you can see a couple of images. The one is a wall painting depicting a dance. We don't know whether it's a labyrinth dance or another dance, but it's just there for fun because I think it's a very nice image up there on the top. But then there are these walking the labyrinth or dancing the labyrinth, kind of recreated in a Viking center in Rosala, which is the image on the left, and a maypole labyrinth dance, also on the right. So what does this dancing thing mean? I also referred to that already slightly earlier. But this dancing is connected to rescuing a girl from the center of the labyrinth. And a surviving law from different countries indicates that in one of these occasions, a girl played the role of the mother goddess and took her place at the center of the labyrinth, which kind of represents a netherworld. And one or two men played the roles of the sky god, who could liberate or abduct the mother goddess from her prison castle of the netherworlds. When she had been abducted from the labyrinth, she probably joined with her liberator in a spring wedding. So there is this kind of wedding theme also connected. I have this, let's see if this works.
Back to the presentation.
Okay. Not here? No. Just a moment. Forward. Oh, here. Okay. Oh, now it works. Okay.
So
Yes. Thank you.
you can make
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Here is a modern recreation of a reconstruction of a labyrinth dance. So here you can see all people from young to old dancing this kind of a spiral form labyrinth.
Koncentreret alle sammen, når man ikke har prøvet det.
Det er ikke stor snublefisk.
This was originally my idea, considering that when I was thinking about the workshops that we could actually dance the labyrinth. Okay, let's stop here because nothing much happens there anyway. One interesting aspect of these stone labyrinths is that some of them are connected to burial sites. And here you can see a map of Finnmark in Norway, in the northern Norway, where these labyrinths occur in burial grounds, which is a very kind of a specific feature. And in Tibble, which is the labyrinth on the right side. So this labyrinth was situated together with innumerable grave mounds. And we don't really know why. And these Finnmark labyrinths in northern Norway that are associated with burials, they were constructed approximately from 1200 to 1700. So, and also in Sweden, especially some of the inland labyrinths have been built on a prehistoric burial grounds. So one of the explanations, or kind of a way to interpret the connection between the labyrinth and burial mounds, comes from a Swedish researcher, or Norwegian researcher, Bjørnar Olsen, who has stated that the Finnmark labyrinths may be understood as material symbols expressing and mapping the structure of life crisis rituals, and in this case, burial rites. So by walking into the labyrinth, the shaman symbolically expresses the separation of the dead individual from this life. And being inside the labyrinth marks the physical separation from the living social world when the individual is contaminated and dangerous. And the ceremony terminates with the shaman leaving the labyrinth as a symbolic manifestation of the dead individual's incorporation into a new state. So anyway, this kind of brings forth this idea of journeying. The passage from life to death to the underworld is considered difficult and long. The labyrinth form, which is waves and long detours, fits well with this idea. And the long route winding inside the labyrinth gives the concrete social reality to the scenario of the shaman guiding the soul through the difficult passage from life to death. So in this respect, combining labyrinth and burials kind of sounds quite logical. But let's move to the other type of labyrinths, and those in medieval churches. And here you can see the map of approximately where these are situated. So we are talking about medieval churches in Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. And there are painted labyrinths in about 25 medieval churches. And all these labyrinths have been made mainly from the around 15th century. And they are painted usually either on the walls or in the walls. So if we imagine a labyrinth in this space, it could be like painted on the wall somewhere here, or then it could be up here on the ceiling somewhere. And also an interesting feature about these painted labyrinths in churches is that they are all in coastal churches. So, and if you remember that these stone constructions, the stone labyrinths are also situated in the coastal areas. So it seems that there is definitely some connection between the labyrinth and the sea in both of these cases. And the exception are the two labyrinths in Norway. Here you can see that these are actually inland. So these are the only two exceptions. But I will just briefly show you these labyrinths and talk and make a few remarks on their details. Let's start with Denmark, and there are 12 labyrinths in Denmark. I only saw, well, there are 8 of them. But anyway, you can kind of, see what they look like. And all these seem to be of the same form, that is the unicursal form. And there are a couple of interesting details in some of these labyrinths, such as the circles in the corners. Like here you can see these circles. They might have been used as when they were drawing the labyrinths, they might have used them as these kind of starting points where they start constructing the labyrinths. Also here you can see these circles. Some of them have also been painted using 2 colors, like in this labyrinth in Roerslev's church. I'm not sure if that's intentional. It could be. Hardly, it's not the case that the color just ran out. I think that, there might be some meaning that 2 colors have been used. In Sweden, there are 9 labyrinths, of which 2 in southern Sweden used to be actually part of the medieval Denmark. But out of these 9, 5 labyrinths are situated in the island of Gotland. See the map here, so you can see, Gotland is the island over here. So 5 labyrinths are in Gotland, including 3 executed in the form of a graffiti. So these are not all painted. There are 3 that were sort of incised. And you can see some of the incised graffitis. One of he's here in the, you can see the bell, church bell. So one of the labyrinths has been incised here. And there's also a shield here in Sorunda church, where a labyrinth has been incised. And also here in Lue church in Gotland, the labyrinth has been incised. A very interesting characteristic of this group is that the labyrinth painting and 2 of the graffiti labyrinths are located on the dark ground floors of church towers. So when we think about the labyrinth, what they were the uses or their intentions, it seems that these labyrinths that were in a tower where you wouldn't normally go when you went to attend the mass. So it seems that some of the labyrinths were definitely not meant to be seen by the populace. So they might have other functions that do not relate to their power to be seen. And we can only speculate what would have been a function of a labyrinth that was made in a place where it wasn't visible. I will talk about that slightly later. And one of the labyrinths has been placed in a highly exceptional place. Well, it's the one here on the bell in Horre Church. So this is, to my knowledge, the only example where a labyrinth is in a church is actually on the church bell. And it has been inscribed with a text, "Help Mary," that refers to Virgin Mary. And that's also quite interesting, and I will talk about that slightly later. And the other, well, this inscribed labyrinth, this is a shield sculpted in the vaulting of the burial chapel of the Fleming family. That was a very powerful Swedish family of that time. So the 2 Norwegian churches, these labyrinths have been painted outside the church. When all these other labyrinths are inside the church, so these are outside the church. And they are very close or next to the doorways. And the location of both of these labyrinths might suggest that they served some kind of apotropaic or protective purpose. So this is also might be the case with these labyrinths in the towers that I just mentioned, that they might have some sort of a protective function connected to them. So the labyrinth on the right in Selfjord Church, the entrance of the labyrinth is exceptionally in the top left, but with unusual spiral center. And the curious look of this labyrinth can be explained by the way the designer has started to connect the cross angles and dots. So if you remember the way you draw the labyrinth, so here the painter has made some sort of an exceptional choice in composing the labyrinth. The conventional way of drawing is to begin with a connecting arc between one of the arms of the central cross and the closest angle. But in this case, the drawing has begun with a connecting arc between a dot and its adjacent angle, resulting in the spiral at the center. So the Eastern Labyrinth group consists of 8 labyrinths in 4 Finnish churches. And here are also a couple of interesting details. Here in Sipoo Church, or here, you can see this very small character inside the labyrinth. And this has often been connected to folklore, you know, the young girl or the virgin inside the labyrinth. Also here you can see that the painter has used 2 different colors. And there are few constructional errors, Like here, the labyrinth has no entrance hole, so the painter has made a little blunder. And I mean, the labyrinth has been painted, you know, correctly in other respects, but there is just no entrance hole. Also here, the labyrinth is kind of slightly different looking than all the rest. So, and all these labyrinths are, the most of them represent this angle type of classical labyrinth. That is the dominant form of the stone labyrinths as well. But there is one exception. Oh, animation slightly later. Okay. So the exception from this angle type labyrinth is the labyrinth from Grinstad Church from Sweden. And this labyrinth that you can see here on the left, only partially because it has been slightly fragmented, and it is the so-called charter labyrinth. And you can see the charter labyrinth on the right. So, I mean, this labyrinth form is the typical that they used in the cathedrals of the Western Europe. And also, this labyrinth in Grinstad has a number of design errors, which might suggest that it was copied from a poor sketch of an example, or for an example, sorry, it was copied from a poor sketch of an example from a European cathedral or an old manuscript. And also, Grinstad Church was originally built during the 13th century, so it is possible that the labyrinth fresco is also from this period. And the time is the same as to the time when other cathedral labyrinths were constructed in the Central Europe. So, what could be the functions of medieval church labyrinths then? Basically, when you begin to think about the function of the labyrinth in medieval churches, there are two things you need to pay attention to. First is the context. So the context means that you have to pay attention and you have to take into account that the labyrinth has been painted to a church. So this pretty much defines on how you can interpret the motive. And second, you have to take into account whether there are other paintings in the church, and if so, what do they depict? And are they close to the labyrinth? So could you perhaps interpret the labyrinth in context of these other paintings? And one of the things that makes these interpretative tasks challenging are that in the medieval ecclesiastic context, the labyrinth has been addressed with multiple meanings, and thus the symbolism of the labyrinth is not easily opened up. Also, one of the interesting things is that labyrinths built of stones were widespread in Scandinavia at that time, and also these labyrinths painted in churches. So it is difficult to say to what extent the church labyrinths were modeled after the stone labyrinths or vice versa, or did this in fact happen at all? But some of the functions that are usually connected to the stone labyrinths are again this coastal connection. So as I mentioned before, also these painted labyrinths are in coastal churches. And in many cases, there are adjoining paintings that refer to the sea, and basically these paintings are the ships. So I already mentioned in the case of this, in the connection of stone labyrinths, that they could have been used as part of the navigation system in the Middle Ages. So perhaps the painted labyrinths might have some sort of connection to that as well, but it is very difficult to verify of what was this kind of a navigational connection between the labyrinths in churches and with the labyrinths or the kind of navigation and shipping industry in the Middle Ages. The labyrinths have also been addressed with a protective function. So basically this means that they could have protected the building from evil forces. Also, the stone labyrinths were used as protection against the perils of the sea, for example, so there might be something similar with these painted labyrinths. Also, the idea of journeying or pilgrimage kind of fits well in the context of the church. The labyrinth could be a symbolic representation of the dangerous and labyrinthine voyage that twists and turns, or a symbol of life in general, a pilgrimage, a path to God, etc. And the cruciform center of the labyrinth may invoke notions of the labyrinths as pathways in the quest of the sacred. So one of an interesting theory is that labyrinths could have worked as mason's marks, or kind of representing some form of a social network. Because spatial arrangements have sometimes been connected to social relations and social communities, which was also the case with the stone labyrinths. So especially the labyrinths in cathedrals have in some connections been kind of associated as architects' emblems. And a Finnish researcher of medieval ecclesiastic art, Markus Hiekkanen, has thus suggested that perhaps these painted labyrinths in Nordic churches might have also operated as you know, the emblems of the masons who built the church. But we can't really know. Then there's this association with the church labyrinths to Virgin Mary. And the Virgin Mary is mentioned alongside the labyrinth at Hesselager Church in Denmark. So over here, you can see the word Maria here. Also in the church bell that I already showed you in Horred, Church Sweden. And in Finland, 4 labyrinths are in the church of Maria, and Maria means Mary, and the church was actually dedicated to the Virgin Mary. So perhaps this could imply a similar connection with the Virgin Mary. And also this labyrinth in Sipoo Church, where this small human character is inside, this Jungfrudans, or the Virgin's dance, could have associations to the Virgin Mary. And there are other instances where the labyrinth seems to have a connection with a saint, so this might not be kind of far-fetched. But this might not be enough to build any theory about a general connection between Nordic church labyrinths and the worship of Mary. But then again, there's the image of an Abingdon manuscript from the 11th century. And it was a manuscript labyrinth created at the Abingdon Abbey in the early 11th century. And it depicts a prayer to Virgin Mary. The prayer is Assumpta est Maria ad celestia, Alleluia. Mary is assumed into heaven, Alleluia. And this prayer is written along the paths, so which can be read either in 2 ways, by following the path of the labyrinth. So traditionally, kind of you start here, and then you go here, and then you go here. Or you can read the prayer kind of according to the circles. So like 1 circle, and then you move to the 2nd circle and the 3rd circle, and so on. And these manners of reading give a different combination. So this suggests that the labyrinth was used in prayer and meditation, which is again very fitting in the ecclesiastic context. So, I mean, if you think about, for example, the idea of the rosary beads, where you count the beads and then you say a prayer, this could have been like basically been used in a similar way, where you could kind of meditate and contemplate by I don't know, maybe you could even move your finger along the labyrinth and read the prayer and then contemplate on that way. But it's very difficult to kind of just leave the interpretations in this level when you kind of try to, as an art historian or historian or cultural historian, if you try to understand how these labyrinths were understood, you have to take account all the other paintings. And I'm only giving you a couple of examples. But here, the Labyrinth joins a depiction of Saint Christopher, who was a patron saint of travelers. Here you can see the labyrinth, or part of it, here. And Saint Christopher is here. I'm sure you all know who he was. He was the carrier of Christ's child. And Christopher, he was a patron saint of travelers, and Scandinavian folklore mentions the walking of labyrinths to ensure good conditions and catches before setting out to sea. So perhaps this painting shows a link between the protector of travelers in Christian iconography with the traditional practices of fishing communities in medieval Denmark. And there's another depiction from Finland, from Maria Church, where the labyrinth has been combined with this warrior-like figure, very enigmatic figure over here, and a rosette over here. So could this be some sort of a reminiscence of the Theseus myth? Who knows? Should this combination be perhaps understood in the context of an eternal combat myth where the warrior will defeat the forces of evil that lurk inside the labyrinth? Or does this represent the Christian soldier and his life journey to God, or a religious pilgrimage or something like that? Well, we don't know. An interesting aspect is the rosette over here, and this is a cosmic symbol. And the rosette appears also, for example, in other labyrinths, as the one in Chartres Cathedral. So the labyrinth seems to have some level of astrological significance, and for example, in medieval manuscripts, it was often placed next to calendar lists and zodiacal charts. That kind of, brings this otherworldly aspect of the labyrinth, which again works in the ecclesiastic and religious contexts, where, ultimately the interior of the church represents something otherworldly. Or then this labyrinth could just, combining with these motifs, it could be also understood as protecting, that it protected the building from some sort of, or some level of evil. But I have given you sort of several ways to interpret the labyrinth, and I also have to say that it is not very easy to give any kind of answers or facts about these labyrinths. And the same interpretation does not necessarily even apply to all the Nordic labyrinths. Rather, they have to be treated as individual cases and then build up a deeper understanding of the meaning of a labyrinth in medieval churches. But what is interesting and what seems to be quite evident, that there seems to be partially similar functions and meanings in both the stone labyrinths and church labyrinths. The association with the sea, this kind of protective, ritualistic function, and so on. But Christianity, in the case of these church labyrinths, has added new layers and provides the context in which to interpret the labyrinth motif. And one of the reasons for the popularity of the labyrinth motif in historical eras as well, whether it was a stone construction or a painted labyrinth, was that it was quite easy to draw if you knew the technique. And the form of the labyrinth may be one of the things that keeps appealing, and the idea of the meandering pathway with an end, and sometimes with several dead ends, is highly susceptible to various symbolical and metaphorical applications. So, apart from its popularity in historical periods, there has been an increased interest towards labyrinth in recent years as well. And now I'm sort of moving to the third part of this lecture that speaks a little about labyrinths. First, I'm just, showing examples of how the labyrinth has been exploited in popular culture. And you all must know the movie Shining, directed by Stanley Kubrick, released in 1980. And this film depicts a large labyrinth, and it was sort of a, well, it was not, technically it was not a labyrinth, it was more of a maze. But here you can see these, you know, the protagonists walking in this labyrinth. Another popular labyrinth movie was the movie called The Labyrinth, surprisingly. It was this kind of a fantasy movie directed by Jim Henson, and it starred David Bowie and Jennifer Connelly. And here the labyrinth is again this very dangerous maze where you have to enter, and there are many dead ends and different kind of, you know, pitfalls in the labyrinth. Also, one of the recent uses of the labyrinth in movies is the Pan's Labyrinth, directed by Guillermo del Toro. Here you can see this looks like the Chartres labyrinth, but the labyrinth form is here. Also in the 2010 movie Inception, that was directed by Christopher Nolan, the concept of the labyrinth was introduced in multiple levels. And here in this movie, the maze-like dreams and experiences of the characters suggest an outcome that returns to the beginning. So here the labyrinth in this movie is not necessarily that concrete, rather more sort of conceptualized. Also, labyrinths have been used in various video games. I'm not even going there because there are a lot in the internet. If you're interested, just Google labyrinth games and you will never be the same again. There is actually, I think, one of the links is this one, Labyrinth, if I remember. Yes, but here basically you can, you know, start by these very simple labyrinth games. I tried to play some of them and I'm just so bad. They are not clearly for me. Also, labyrinths in contemporary culture has been used by various artists and constructions, and here I give you a couple of very nice images that kind of show the various ways on how you can actually build a labyrinth. So Moto Yamamoto, the labyrinth on the left, has used salt in creating his labyrinths. And then there is this installation labyrinth, and you can also see that it is clearly a type of labyrinth that you can enter. Also, writers and poets, art educators, other educators, teachers, and even therapists can use labyrinths. And in fact, in educational and art educational projects, it seems that the labyrinth is a very exploitable motif. So I think that this comes down from the idea that the labyrinth is a unicursal, so meaning a single course or path. So once you get on a labyrinth, you need only to follow the path with no dead ends or choices to make. So follow the path and you will arrive at the center. So in comparison, a maze is multicursal, meaning that there are many ways out of it, many detours, and it's generally thought of as a mental challenge, almost stressful. So maze can thus make you disoriented, and you can lose your way, and you could be on the same path over and over again. So labyrinths can calm you down, and that's why they are regarded as very useful in educational purposes. But on the other hand, mazes can activate the brain much more effectively. But these labyrinths that are constructed currently in contemporary culture by various communities, they are often like specifically community projects or other large group events. Or they are projects for children. They are used in recreational settings or in parks, or even within academic disciplines. And I will end with this example of the labyrinth at the University of Kent that was designed as a teaching and learning recourse. So the idea behind this labyrinth was that labyrinths in universities and colleges provide a quiet, reflective space for staff and students, and often for the wider community. But labyrinths are also being used in other creative ways within and beyond academic disciplines, as part of teaching and learning, for staff and student development, and as a topic of research or to support the research process. So here are a few of the ways how labyrinths are used, for example, in the University of Kent. It can operate as a creative project for design and construction. So it has been used by the disciplines of art, architecture, agriculture, landscape design, creative writing, and so on. It also operates as a personal and clinical resource for students and staff. Also lectures, different workshops, and labyrinth walks within a wide range of programs are held in the labyrinth. It is used in religious studies. So the labyrinth can be used to explore symbology and history or to deepen spiritual practice, as the labyrinth has this kind of meditative aspect in it. Also pedagogy and mathematics can use a labyrinth. Also it operates as an event for sports or other sort of well-being events. It is a place for networks and forums, and a place for retreats and conferences. So the labyrinth is a very, a bendy form, so it is not just a historical form or a historical concept. It can still be used in our current culture and also in the university. So, thank you.